Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. As promised, we are going to continue on with some of the top stories that we've been following from this week. And a lot of our attention has been on the Supreme Court as they're coming to an end of their term. I'm going to put this back up on your screen right now. We have that from the SCOTUS Wire talking about the Supreme Court ruling that is going to be impacting temporary protective status here in the United States, particularly for Syrian and Haitian immigrants. We've been watching how all of this has unfolded, and we wanted to make sure that we're continuing to keep you up with the very latest information. And as we do have here with us on the other side, we're going to be speaking to an immigration attorney to answer some of the questions that you might have as well about the Supreme Court ruling. Putting this up on your screen, we'd like you to scan that QR code in the top right corner. That's going to take you directly to our website. That is going to take you to the place where it says livenowfox.com/connect, where you can submit your questions for our legal experts to answer. And so, again, what we do know is that it's really been, as according to Reuters, since President Trump returned to his presidency last year, he promised to aggressively crack down on immigration and pursue a campaign of deportation, also likely to impact folks who are seeking asylum here in the United States. We do know that the Supreme Court, which has a 6-3 conservative majority, just has made rulings that have green-lighted the Republican president's policies targeting both legal and illegal immigration as well. And so, again, the biggest one that we've had in the last 24 hours came from the Supreme Court that affects temporary protected status for Syrian and Haitian immigrants. And to talk a little bit more about what we've learned there, I want to bring into the conversation Sushant Modi. He's an immigration attorney. Sushant, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me back on, Christina.
Of course, and I do want to continue on with some of the bigger stories and headlines here. Folks may have gotten online. They saw that TPS is lapsing, according to what the Supreme Court has now said. They may be not sure as to what TPS even stands for. Can you first start off with just a basic explanation of what temporary protective status is?
Sure. So TPS is temporary protected status. And what it's for is for any like natural or humanitarian disasters. So think earthquakes, flooding, or humanitarian disasters, if there's civil violence, gang violence. And what it gives is the Department of Homeland Security under the executive branch, under President Trump's administration currently, the power to allow people to stay here from that designated country under one of those conditions.
And so as we're taking a look there at the makeup of the Supreme Court, that was a big part of the ruling. It was 6-3 with that conservative majority ruling in this case. What else did we learn ultimately from what the decision is that came down?
Yeah, there were two major parts, Christina, to the decision. So one is statutory interpretation. So what I mean by that is Congress has the power to create laws, and in this case, created TPS, and whether or not the Trump administration followed statutory interpretation, and whether the courts could even review the Trump administration's decision to end TPS. So that was one of the issues. The second issue, Christina, was one of constitutionality under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and whether or not the decision to end TPS was racially motivated. So that's what the Supreme Court looked at, was those two issues. And they found, the majority opinion found that for both of them, the Trump administration was allowed to end TPS. Now, it gets more interesting if you look at the underlying reason of the decision and the dissenting opinion as well, Christina.
And so, Sushant, as we're taking a live look there at the White House, we do know that this has been a part of some of the conversation that President Trump has had since he has returned to office. And folks are now starting to speak out. But I want to talk first about some of the people who will likely be impacted. We do know that it was more than 300,000 folks from Haiti who are set to be impacted by that, while about 6,100 from Syria. If those folks are already here and under that TPS ruling, what does this mean for them and their day-to-day life moving forward?
Yeah, that's correct. As you point out, Christina, it's over 350,000 individuals that could be impacted. But the interesting thing here is actually it's probably going to be a lot more individuals that are impacted. And the reason why is because the Supreme Court had basically ruled that it's not up for judicial review, not up for the court's review. in almost every circumstance whether or not an administration can end TPS. So what does that mean? Other major countries like Venezuela, for example, have over 600,000 estimated individuals in the United States. So in terms of this decision, it not only affects individuals from Haiti and Syria, but also these other countries, and there's several of them that have TPS. There are some estimates, Christina, that it will affect over 1.1 million individuals in the United States.
And so I guess the next question becomes what's next on the legal side of things? As you said, this can't be reviewed. I want to ask you about precedent. Does this now set a new precedent for immigration cases that are still going to be coming up to the highest court in the next few years as well?
I do not think so. And the reason why is because in this circumstance, Congress gave in a law that it's not up for the courts to review TPS. It's really a Department of Homeland Security decision under the executive branch. And that was in the statute that Congress wrote. And that's really what the majority opinion relied on in this circumstance. If we look at other types of immigration laws, so I think one that should be coming out soon within a few days, and I was honored to be on your program discussing it before, is birthright citizenship. I think we'll get a decision soon on that. But that is a whole different issue because that turns on constitutionality, not on Congress giving more authority to the executive branch. So that's one example where this will have no bearing on that decision on birthright citizenship or many others.
And so, as you said, that's still a decision that we're waiting to come down as the Supreme Court is getting closer and closer to its summer recess. And so, as I wanted to put up on the screen, we've been asking folks for some of their questions that they'd like to ask you, Susham, while we have you all here on the line. I'm going to pull one up here. This is coming from Roxanne. Thank you, Roxanne, for submitting this from Los Angeles. She says this: how soon will Haitians and Syrians be removed from the country? Now, I think even the context of this question can go deeper. Is that a possibility that those who have been here since 2010 or 2012 from those original natural disasters will have to initially leave, or will they be removed? Will they be offered an opportunity to stay underneath a different protective clause?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I would answer it in two ways. First, in terms of the immediate timeline, it's pretty much unknown. And the reason why is because DHS has to come through what's called a registrar. So I would check that carefully, and then that would determine at what time individuals need to leave. It also is different for other individuals. So we talked about Venezuela before, but that had ended in different periods. There's two registration periods in 2025. So for other countries, it's also different. But specifically for Haitians and Syrians, we need to wait for the registrar. The second way that I would answer that question is it doesn't necessarily mean they will be removed. So remember, there are other laws that they may have protections under. So for example, for Haiti, there is a lot of violence. I think we can all agree to. I think there were four individuals that were recently removed to Haiti, and all four bodies were found beheaded in a river. So if an individual is afraid to go back there and they're from that country, they might have the possibility to apply for asylum, which is an international right to stay here and fight their deportation case if they qualify. And they would want to do a consultation with an immigration attorney, not just for asylum if they think that's applicable, for other reliefs too. And that makes it very, very time sensitive because, again, that registrar moment of when they need to leave could be very, very soon.
All right, we appreciate your context, and thank you for submitting that question, Roxanne. Susham, we have yet another one here. If you're able to take a look at this, this is from Francis and Katie saying, does this mean pending TPS and asylum applications will be counted as unlawful presence for aliens who are applying, those being migrants who came here?
Another really excellent question. So to take a step back, what is unlawful presence? So what unlawful presence is when somebody's here unlawfully, they're accruing that. And if they accrue 180 days of it and then they leave, that's called a 3-year unlawful presence bar. And if they accrue a year of it and then they leave, that's called a 10-year unlawful presence bar. So they're called the 3 and 10-year unlawful presence bars. Now, normally, when anybody has a properly pending application like TPS or asylum, they do not accrue unlawful presence during that time that the application is pending. So for the asylum answer, no, you're still eligible, just as I mentioned before, to apply for asylum and if you qualify for it, and during while it's pending, you do not accrue unlawful presence. Uh, for TPS, like I said, what the Supreme Court just decided, there may be a time very soon in the registrar where they do not only allow new TPS applications, but the individuals on those national country lists need to be removed or leave by that date unless they have these other reliefs like asylum, and there could be several others.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you for joining us, Susham. And lastly, before I let you go, I really just want to focus on those who might be impacted by this ruling and are at home and wondering what their next steps will be. Obviously, as an immigration attorney yourself, I'm not saying you should have to give legal advice for any particular
Right.
case, but are there some steps that someone should take if this ruling affects them or family member or someone they know?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, this is going to affect, like I mentioned, a lot of individuals, estimate of over 1 million individuals. But with that being said, and there are horrific conditions abroad. I mean, if we look at Haiti, we talked about the four ladies that were recently beheaded and the violence there. If we look at even Venezuela, there was recent news articles about earthquakes, and unfortunately, several hundred individuals have died, and several more hundred individuals cannot even be found yet. In fact, TPS, this is one of the purposes of TPS, is not to remove individuals that are facing natural disasters. Now that's up to the Trump administration. Now, will the Trump administration add Venezuela back on the TPS list, given the very recent earthquake and the horrific damage there to both property and, of course, individuals? But the second part of it, on the individual basis, as your question was, Christina, is instead of fear because of what's going on here, I think it's better to plan. And there can be different types of relief people can look into, like if they're afraid to go back asylum, if they're married to a US citizen, a marriage-based green card. But those are not easy to determine. That's why an immigration attorney needs to be involved. That's the best thing to do because this analysis is complicated. So one of your viewers' questions was unlawful presence, but that's while an application is pending. There's several other issues, like was there unlawful presence before the application was pending, and what was their manner of entry, and do they have certain exceptions to be able to apply for these reliefs? So that's why it's going to be really crucial and time sensitive, urgent, to do a good consultation with an immigration attorney.
Well, we certainly appreciate you for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. As always, Susham, of course, major rulings still to come from the Supreme Court before that break when they go away for the summer. But we certainly appreciate you for taking down the very latest.
Thanks for having me. Good seeing you.